Hello everyone, welcome to Adra's Easy Talks. Today we are going to look into the poem To His Coy Mistress written by Andrew Mavell. So in this presentation, I'll be looking at two schools of poetry that this man, Andrew Mavell, belongs to. Along with that, I'll be dealing with the brief biography or brief life history of this man, Andrew Mavell, and some basic facts about this poem To His Coy Mistress. So let's move on. So as I said, they have two school of poetry belong ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ആളാണ്. The one is Cavaliar poetry and the other is Metaphysical school of poetry. So who are this man? Who are these Cavaliar poets? Cavaliar poets are a group of English gentleman poets, and they were called as Cavaliers because they were loyal to Charles I during the English Civil War period. They were also Cavaliers in their style of life, accounted the writing of polished and elegant lyrics. The theme included from love lyrics to war, honor, and duty to king, etc. And there are some figures that you need to understand while preparing for any competitive exam relating to English literature. They are Richard Lovelace, Thomas Carew, Sir John Suckling, Edmund Waller, and Robert Herrick. So these are the major writers of Cavalier group of poetry. And there is Herrick, a clergyman who was detached from the court. His short, fluent, graceful lyrics on love and dalliance and his carpe diem, seize the day philosophy, are typical of the Cavalier style. So seize the day. Carpe diem philosophy is a basic theme in any Cavalier poems. Okay. Then we have the Metaphysical school of poetry. These metaphysical poets are a group of poets of the 17th century, and they share some common characteristic features. What are they? They are the poem begins with an abrupt and dramatic beginning. They use far-fetched, striking similes, and they called it as metaphysical conceits. Then striking imageries, extravagant use of hyperbole, remarkable comparison is used. Then complex thoughts, metaphysical conceits, intellectual complexity is also present in this kind of metaphysical poetry. This school of poetry began with John Donne in the beginning of 17th century. Along with John Donne, there were other poets also, and these poets followed the tradition that John Donne had established. They include Andrew Mavell, Abraham Cowley, George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Henry Vaughan, Thomas Tranham, and John Cleveland, and this tradition lasted till the end of the 17th century. So Donne is the founder of this metaphysical school of poetry, and Marvell is one of the finest flower in this group. So talking about the term metaphysics was, as I said, was used by Dryden. It's not Donne. It is used by Dryden in his book Discourse Concerning Satire, and this work, Discourse Concerning Satire, is a criticism of Donne. Dryden said, Donne affects metaphysics. Later, Dr. Samuel Johnson applied the term metaphysical to this group of poems in his Life of Cowley in Lives of Poets. In this work, the Lives of Poets, he had included the lives of 52 poets. So, Abraham Cowley is one among those poets whom Samuel Johnson had talked about in this work. So, Dr. Samuel Johnson said, about the beginning of the 17th century appeared a race of writers that may be termed as a metaphysical poets. They were men of learning, and to show their learning was their whole endeavor. They neither copied nature nor life. In their poetry, the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Very important. The line is very famous. It might ask for exam. The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. According to Samuel Johnson, metaphysical poets like Donne fuse thoughts and emotions, and one find an association of sensibility. And later in the Victorian age, this idea can be seen, but they changed the term in another sense. That is, they changed association of sensibility into dissociation of sensibility, and this shift can be seen in Victorian period. Then, talking about the poet Andrew Mavell, he was born on March 31, 1621 in Minstead, Yorkshire, England, and died on August 18, 1678 in London. He is an English poet, and he established his reputation until the 20th century. He is one of the best writer of both Cavaliar and Metaphysical School of Poetry. Talking about his earlier education, he was educated at Hull Grammar School and Trinity College, Cambridge, taking a BA in 1639. His father's death in 1641 may have ended Marvell's promising academic career. So, after the death of his father, he could not continue studies. He was abroad for at least 5 years, presumably a tutor. In 1651 to 52, he was tutor to Mary, daughter of Lord Fairfax, the Parliament General at Nun, Appleton, Yorkshire, during which time he probably wrote his notable poem upon Appleton House and the Garden, as well as a series of more poems. Although earlier opposed to Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth government, he wrote an oration ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland. This work is very important. An oration ode upon Cromwell's return for Ireland, which is written in 1615. And from 1653 to 1657, he was a tutor to Cromwell's ward, William Dutton. This name should be remembered. In 1657, he became assistant to John Milton as Latin secretary in the Foreign Office. The first anniversary in 1655 and on the death of O.C. 1659 showed his continued and growing admiration for Cromwell. In 1659, he was elected Member of Parliament for Hull, an office he held until his death, serving skillful and effective. After the restoration of Charles II in 1616, Marvell turned to political satires. The most notable was the last instruction to a painter against Lord Clarendon, Charles Lord Chancellor, and political satire, notably the rehearsal Trapsford. Marvell is also said to have interceded on behalf of Milton to have him freed from prison in 1616. That is very important thing that happened in his life period. He wrote a commentary poem for the second edition of Milton's Paradise Lost. Very important. His political writings favored the toleration of religious dissent and attacked the abuse of monarchical power. At Marvell's death, his housekeeper servant, Mary Palmer, claimed to be his widow, although this was undoubtedly a legal fiction. The first publication of his poem in 1681 resulted from a manuscript volume she found among his effects. While Marvell's political reputation has faded and his reputation as a satirist is on a par with others of his time, a small body of lyric poems, first recommended in the 19th century by Charles Lamb, has since appealed to many readers, and in the 20th century, he came to be considered as one of the most notable poets of the century. Marvell was eclectic. His To His Coy Mistress is a classic of metaphysical poetry. The Cromwell Odes are the work of classicists. His attitude are sometimes those of the elegant Cavalier poets, and his nature poems resemble those of the Puritan Platonist. In To His Coy Mistress, which is one of the most famous poem in English language, the impatient poet urges his mistress to abandon her false modesty and submit to his embraces before time and death rob them of the opportunity to love. So his notable works are To His Coy Mistress, The Garden, and An Oration Ode. Talking about his work To His Coy Mistress, it is a Cavalier poem. It was published posthumously in 1681 and follows Carpe philosophy. It's a 46-line poem, and this poem has 3 parts, and it is in the structure of syllogism. In the first part, first 20 lines contain the first proposition. The second part, that is the next 12 lines, states the second proposition. And in the third part, he gives a conclusion for this both premises, for these two propositions. Okay. Then there are 2 poets who challenged his poem. That is, the one is Annie Finch. His Coy Mistress suggests that poetry is more fitting use of their time than lovemaking. Then A.D. Hope wrote, His Coy Mistress to Mr. Marvell turns down the offered seduction outright. Then, talking about the structure of the poem, it is written in iambic tetrameter and rhymes in couplet. The first line of the poem is, Had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. The last line, Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we will make him run. So, about the poem. To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Mavell is a beautiful love poem based on a gentleman owing his mistress to make love with him. To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Mavell details the effort of a man toward insisting on his lover's affection. The name, unnamed Coy Mistress, refuses to sleep with this gentleman in question, and his response is to tell her that had he enough time, he could spend entire centuries admiring her beauty and her innocence. However, human life is short. He does not have enough time, and so that they should enjoy each other now while they still can. No one in death can embrace or feel pleasure. Through loving one another, they can make the most of their brief time on earth and thus make something of themselves on earth.